You're listening to The Voice of Reason with Mark Reed and Ted Durden, only on LA Talk Radio.
Good evening, and welcome to another edition of The Voice of Reason. My name is Ted Durden. I'm a Southern Democrat.
And I'm Mark Reed, a West Coast Republican.
And together we are The Voice of Reason. Well, those of you tuning in for the very first time, this is a politically motivated podcast where civil discourse is the order of the day, where Mark and I find that we have more things that unite us than there are things that divide us. And as I do every week, I toss the ball over to my co-host, Mark Reed.
Well, I'm going to start off this episode here with my monologue. And my monologue is actually the FCC testimony that I gave in August 31st of 2006. Control information and you control the nation. That was the theme of my testimony before the FCC several years ago when I spoke on behalf of the Screen Actors Guild. More than ever, it is my theme today. And even so more today in 2020 now. Right. Because in the years since then, fewer and fewer people are controlling more and more of today's media. And we rely on America's media as our source of diverse information. But with fewer people now controlling our media, that diversity is being lost. Not racial diversity, but the kind of diversity that is key to American survival, the diversity of ideas. With fewer people now controlling more media, we're being denied diverse information, herded into uniformity, the uniformity of thought that is parent to tyranny. We ask the FCC to help us prevent that tyranny of uniform thought. And literally, there's no time to waste anymore. We need the FCC's help. Our borders are weak. Our people are actually very confused. And the information we get is controlled, opinionated, and sanitized. If we are to survive, we must have balanced information so that we can think about it, so we can debate it and dissent. I know what I'm talking about. I'm an American Indian, descent of an ignored people, and I'm a proud American citizen. What was once Indian country is now our American nation, which, like every other nation on earth, is a nation of immigrants. But our America is unique because it was founded on diverse ideas as much as diverse races. Without diversity of ideas based on open information, we American citizens are certain to lose our liberties. Control information and you control the nation. It's happening now, and it must be stopped. Ted, I did an interview today with a Rosemary Gibson on a book that she did. It's called China RX, Exposing the Risk of America's Dependence on China for Medicine. And let me tell you, in the interview and in reading the book, I spent 2 days reading this book. Mm-hmm. And it exemplifies exactly what today's media is not covering. This is why over the holidays, I told you I was sick and tired of listening to the impeachment papers.
Right.
Because there's so much happening in America today that is being ignored by our media. Where in the hell is our investigative reporting? Where in the hell is our fourth estate working on our behalf to uncover what the hell the government's doing to us? You know, we talk about racism, we talk about minimum wage. 25 new states are raising their minimum wage. We've exhausted that completely. You know, we're going to do a show on that, a full show on that eventually.
Right.
But what the hell is our media doing except for having a soap opera called impeachment?
Well, I can tell you right now, what has happened to the media in America is that it's become a 24-hour news cycle, where everybody pursues some form or some version of the soundbite of the day.
Right.
Gone are the days of unbiased reporting, and you and I have talked about that before. I long for the days of the Walter Cronkites back in the day, where news that was reported was clean and unbiased. They simply reported the facts and let the American public draw their own conclusions. Nowadays, we're guided, we're herded, we're given.
Uniformity of thought.
And that's exactly what it's happening.
Either you're thinking this way or you're thinking that way. There's a thin line in the middle, and we're battling each other. And it's created by the news.
Well, it's like you said, the days where there was a lot of investigating reported, when the news actually tackled and reported those things that affected all of America on a variety of levels.
Yep.
Nowadays, it's political speak, it's political news, it's murder du jour.
Yep.
It's crime, it's this, it's that. Of course, you have your normal fluff pieces. But like you're saying, this whole reeling, and that's the perfect phrase, this epidemic of our medicine being provided by China.
Ted, this is worse than an epidemic. This is a national security threat of epic proportions, of our economy, of our military, of our politics, and our health.
Well, see, at its core, it's the health. Because if we're too sick to defend ourselves, then we become easy prey.
Did you know if there was an anthrax attack on America, who supplies the antidote for anthrax?
Well, China does.
China.
Yes.
Right. I mean, we're stuck. If China wanted to engage in some kind of biological attack, they hold all the keys to every antidote. We don't even make penicillin here.
Well, you know what, and I'm not going to go too much off subject, but even to a larger degree, as far as I'm concerned, China has us by the gonads, in the sense that they have loaned us so much money that if they ever call that bill due, as a nation, we would be bankrupt and subjected to the rule if they ever decided to call that bill in, because we have no way to pay for it.
Well, let me tell you, they don't have us by the gonads. They have surgically removed our gonads already and have taken over so many aspects of global economy. There's so many nations that are beholden to China right now. We still have an ability to fight back, and I think that this administration's renegotiation of the trade deals is fighting back at this moment. Because we have a taped interview, we have a very short intro here.
Right.
And so I wanted to, because on the taped interview, I did not give the bio for Rosemary Gibson. She's a senior advisor at Hastings Center, author of China RX, Exposing the Risk of America's Dependency on China for Medicine. Rosemary Gibson is a senior advisor at the Hastings Center and Perspectives editor at JAMA in Internal Medicine. She is the author of China RX, Exposing the Risk of America's Dependence on China for Medicine. It reveals the dramatic shift in where medicines are made and the implications for U.S. health, security, and national security. Ms. Gibson is a recipient of the highest honor of the American Medical Writers Association for outstanding contributions to the public's interest in reporting on critical health care issues. China RX was selected by the National Press Club for its 2018 book fair. She serves on the board of the Altrium Institute, a nonprofit health systems research group in Ann Arbor. She is a member of the MedStar Institute for Quality and Patient Safety Advisory Board and the Board of Accreditation Council for Graduate Medical Education. She served on the ACGME-CLER Evaluation Committee to advance patient safety and quality in teaching, hospitals, and other clinical learning environments. Ms. Gibson is a faculty for the Academy of Emerging Leaders in Patient Safety, which hosts summer immersion programs in patient safety in medical students, nursing students, and residents. At the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, Ms. Gibson's architect is decades-long national strategy in intricate palliative care in the nation's hospitals. The number of palliative care programs in acute care facilities increased from a handful in 1999 to 1,950 in 2018. She is a recipient of a Lifetime Achievement Award of the American Academy of Hospice and Palliative Medicine. Her own books include Wall of Silence, which puts a human face on the Institute of Medicine report, To Error is Human, Treatment Trap, Battle Over Healthcare, and Medical Meltdown, chronicle the behind-the-scenes forces that shape our healthcare industry. We're going to go to an advertisement. Right after the advertisement, we're going to go to the taped interview with Rosemary Gibson. Enjoy. Hi, I want to welcome Rusty Levin and Harry Nabanian, both trial lawyers for workman comp cases. If you're injured on the job, don't hesitate. Contact an attorney. I did when I was wounded or injured on my job, and I thought I would trust my employer, and it didn't work out quite well. So I found Rusty Levin, handled my case like a professional, worked out way better than any other lawyer that I talked to would have worked out. So Rusty, tell us a little bit about your company of Levin and Nabanian Trial Lawyers.
So at our firm at Levin Albania Trial Lawyers, we handle all matters of workers' compensation, personal injury, and employment disputes, wrongful termination matters, and things like that. We were able to help Mr. Reed out with his workers' compensation case. Unfortunately, workers' compensation injury can be very stressful, intense situation. And at Levin Albania, we try to get you the most benefit we can of the law, while also easing the stress and anxiety that comes along with that situation, and getting you back on your feet. My partner, Mr. Nalbandian, he handles the personal injury sides, and I'll let him take it from there.
And just like all injured employees out there, anybody else who gets injured as a result of somebody else's negligence has rights, and the rights that they need to protect immediately. And they should do that by calling Levin and Nalbandian Trial Lawyers and letting us help ease that tension off of you and get you the result you deserve, while also making sure that you get better in the progress. So we're here for you, folks.
Levin and Nabanian Trial Lawyers is the best company for you to get a hold of when you're injured or have a personal injury. So give them a call at
213-232-4848, 213-232-4848. Thank you.
and let them handle the stress for you while you recover at home. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Hi, my name is Ted Durden, and I want to take a moment to talk to you about trust, and I trust churchandlaw.com. When it comes to workers' compensation and employment law, you can trust churchandlaw.com. If you ever need legal advice you can rely on, it's churchandlaw.com. Black and white, no gray, churchandlaw.com. 818-230-3110, churchandlaw.com. A law firm you can trust and count on.
I want to welcome everybody to this special edition with Rosemary Gibson, the leading expert of health and pharmaceutical issues within the United States, who has testified in front of the Congress on these issues. Rosemary, I want to welcome you to the show, and I'm very grateful for you coming
Mark,
on, without a doubt.
I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you.
I was amazed. A good friend, mutual friend of ours, Chuck Dudek, sent me your book, and I spent the last 2 days reading it. And what an amazing book it is. And I want to start off by asking you a very simple question. Should America ever consider China a friend or a foe?
We play checkers and China plays chess.
So they're playing matrix chess.
And remember, they're sending illegal fentanyl
Right.
into communities across America, and tens of thousands of people are suffering from it.
Absolutely. There's a couple of...
There's a deliberate
Oh, I agree.
strategy.
That's why I brought that up. Should America consider China a friend or a foe? I think based on the fact that China, along with Russia, are the only two adversaries left in the UN Security Council that have veto power. And China and Russia continually line up against American interests, against Western interests. So China, by all fact, is I wouldn't say a full-out enemy, but it is an enemy. I'm going to read something from your book here, which I really like quite a bit, which explains it. And it says the China's strategy draws from an ancient Chinese saying, encourage your enemy to expend his energy in futile quest while you conserve your strength. When he is exhausted and confused, you attack with energy and purpose. The manager of a Chinese-owned factory was quoted in Bloomberg as saying, the best way to beat the enemy is probably go to their homeland. Is China successfully doing this?
When it comes to our generic drugs,
Well,
China has gotten control over thousands and thousands of the medicines that Americans take every day because they got control of the key ingredients.
they control, I believe in your book, it's over 80% of the active ingredients of all medications produced.
They control the active ingredients and the chemicals to make them. That's absolutely right.
Exactly.
We can't even make penicillin anymore.
Right. So America, along with several other nations, or their supply chain for medication is reliant on China.
It's globally.
Globally, that's what I mean.
Yeah, the
All
world,
nations.
all roads lead to China when it comes to our medicine. And it's not just because it's cheaper that China's lower cost labor and weaker environmental regulations. There was a whole plan, their cartel strategy, which we can talk about if you like. They form cartels, their companies, and they dump it at below market price. And then they drive out all the U.S. and other global competitors.
Well,
That's how they get market.
This is how they've dominated the market.
So a friend doesn't do that.
No.
It's about domination.
Well, this is where I think people have a misconception of doing business with China. You're not doing business with individuals in China. You're doing business with the Chinese government.
That's why this topic of medicines is so important, Mark. People may not understand 5G or what's going on in the South China Sea, but people understand their medicines. And when they open up their medicine cabinet or open one of the plastic bottle of pills, and they see that China's gotten into our medicine supply, that's a wake-up call for a lot of people who haven't thought about China.
Isn't the fact that medications now, because of the FDA, that the pharmaceutical companies are really operating behind an iron curtain of secrecy?
Well, as
you can't tell where the active ingredients or the inactive ingredients
exactly
are coming
right.
from. So
That's right.
realistically, if you have some kind of a complication with the medication, your hospitals and doctors really don't know, and they don't report it as such. They'll just say it was an allergic reaction or bad reaction from this one particular patient.
And more than that, how can, if you have, this is the case that opens up China RX, the
Right.
45-year-old Johns Hopkins trained physician who walked
Right.
into a very famous hospital, and when his family got contaminated heparin
Right.
from China.
That
And
is
then
a-
how do you trace that back? And the lack of traceability to know where it came from makes it a very, very successful strategy for China if they wanted to take America down.
Now, in the book, it's pointed out that the FDA and their testing procedures are actually kind of catching up right
Well,
now. It's still not safe, and they still don't, because it's a couple of times they've tried to pass the transparency acts of where medications are coming from, but
Right.
the lobbyists of the pharmaceutical companies have shut it down completely. So we really can't trace it. The average person can't trace it. Even the purchasing agents of hospitals can't trace it.
And even some of the big companies, their suppliers. They may not know who they are.
Right. Well, I've read in the book, because they say they call them up and they say, who supplied the medication? Well, that's proprietary. We can't tell you.
Well, even some of the companies won't tell the Department of Defense where the medicines that they give to service members come from. Think of that. And these are taxpayer money. We're now already sending $6 billion of taxpayer money to China for generic drugs. China got 9% of the generic drug market in the U.S. We're already getting antibiotics, medicines for Alzheimer's, AIDS, Parkinson's
Right.
disease, diabetes, epilepsy.
High blood pressure medication.
Made in China by
Everything.
Chinese, and it had rocket fuel in it. We got
Yep.
blood pressure medicine from China that had rocket fuel in it. And the company knowingly sent defective product with what they call genotoxic impurities. It can change your DNA. They knowingly sent that to the United States. And it went on for 4 years before it was discovered. This is how insidious it is to send a contaminated drug. That was done for economic reasons. But China can be using that to test what's our surveillance system, how quick are we, can we pick up on this and then intercept it and stop it. We have very poor signaling to pick up on these things.
Well, because of this and the loss of manufacturing in the United States, I believe it was 87 or 85,000 scientists were actually unemployed because all of the manufacturers picked up and built plant their plants in China.
That's right. You look across this country,
Right.
and there's who knows how many, but drug manufacturing facilities, largely generics, that are either gone or abandoned
Right.
as production is gone. And what's happening now, just early last year, Mark, this was a pivotal point. 3 of the largest Western generic drug companies announced that they were dropping half their products because they can't compete.
And that was a strategic plan by China to do that.
Exactly right. And now what are we seeing? Drug shortages.
They've done the same thing even in vitamins, haven't they?
They-
Vitamin C, vitamin A,
There's-
I believe D and E.
This is a really important case, the vitamin C cartel case.
Right.
And here's why it's important. China was testing us again and using our legal system to undermine our economic system.
I think you called it lawfare.
Lawfare.
Yes.
So a handful of Chinese companies dumped vitamin C. A lot of people take vitamin C on the global market at below market price, and they drove everybody out of business.
Right.
Then they raised the price.
Yep.
Perfect antitrust case. So a Brooklyn jury found the Chinese companies guilty of violating the Sherman Antitrust Act. Clear-cut evidence, and it was unequivocal. But the Chinese government appealed that decision with the help of the Chinese government. And here was their argument. The Chinese government said in a brief filed on behalf of their companies, we required our companies as a matter of Chinese law to fix prices
Right.
and control the supply of this product to the United States. Think of the implications of that.
Oh, I look at the implications of that secret tribunal of the arbitration tribunal of 3 lawyers.
Yeah,
I
but here, and this vitamin C case, the Federal Appeals Court
Right.
in Manhattan said, well, the Chinese government is saying it's a matter of Chinese law, and we can't expect Chinese companies to abide by their law and U.S. laws. So, in the interest of international comity,
Right.
we're going to overturn the lower court decision. Think of the implications of that.
No, this is where
This would allow Chinese companies and companies from anywhere to come in and form cartels and totally blow up our market-based economy. And this went on, it's now 15 years, this case.
Right.
It wasn't until 2 years ago that the U.S. Department of Justice finally weighed in on behalf of American businesses and American consumers. And so the case went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, in a unanimous decision written by Justice Ginsburg, said, they sent it back to the lower court. They said, the lower court put too much credence in what the Chinese government said, that it was a matter of law. Because at the trial, the company said, we did it voluntarily. So now it's back with the appeals court. It's been more than a year. And where were all the free trade acolytes all these years? Those who advocated for opening up free trade with China. And here China was coming in using American lawyers and our court system to undermine that same free market system. It's absolutely stunning.
Well, I got a kind of an offshoot question on this, and that is because, President Trump, this administration, and our negotiators with China at this point, they're probably making great steps, leaps and bounds of dealing with the intellectual property rights, law, oversight, inspections, and so forth. A whole bunch of glorious things in the trade negotiations that people don't know about. Have you had any inside information that they are addressing a lot of these legal implications?
Well, look what started December 2019. China has a new cybersecurity law. And it basically gives it the right to look at all information systems,
Right.
businesses and private individuals in China. So you can't have a private server if you're a business operating in China.
And that law just passed.
That law is in effect now.
It's in effect
So
now.
there's no secret.
There is no secret.
How can anybody do business in China and preserve any kind of intellectual property, or even just information about their business operations, who their distributors are? That's the first thing.
Do you think it's
Yeah.
the perfect storm of greed and ignorance of our elected officials that have come together to allow China to do this? Because this is going back to the first trade agreements in 2000.
When we opened up free trade with China,
Right.
that's when we lost our ability to make penicillin. The last
Right.
penicillin plant closed. That's when we saw the vitamin C cartel. That's when the last aspirin plant closed in the U.S. We can't make aspirin in this
Right.
country. And that's when we got contaminated blood thinner that killed hundreds of people, when the company started purchasing it from China rather than the U.S. So opening free trade with China, this is what it did.
Okay, and a lot of it, there's one clause in there I read, and it said the reason why China makes the how would you say, medications and the active ingredients, right? And also the non-active ingredients and medications.
Absolutely.
Is because it's so cheap. It's because there's no liability. Also, you can't sue China.
That's right.
So they can flood the markets with this.
Made in China, sue in America. Good luck.
Exactly. It doesn't work.
Right.
Right. So there's no recourse for Americans to go down when they've been poisoned, like the case that you bring up in the beginning
What
of the
happened with
book.
hundreds of people in 2007 and 8 in this country that died because of contaminated blood thinner that they got in the hospital or when they were on dialysis?
Right.
What recourse? Nobody went to jail in China. Nobody was arrested.
What was there appropriate what do you call it, data gathering from that as well? Because I was reading in your book and reading other reports that when the doctors do a report, they don't check off a box death, so it doesn't show up over there as a death caused by.
Oh, the estimated number of deaths was an underestimate.
Way
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, because of the reports that they have to write, the doctors really don't want it. It's not that they don't want to write them. It's kind of like, well, the deed is done. Let's just send the report and get it out of here.
So let's take another example. There was a Chinese company that sent this blood pressure medicine to the United States with this carcinogen in it.
Right.
And lo and behold, 2 years ago, they opened up a plant in North Carolina making medicines for the United States. And there's no apology, there's no nothing. And this is medicine, by the way, that went around the world and
Right.
also went to our military. During one of the hearings on Capitol Hill, a retired Army colonel described how we got 3 different blood pressure medicines, and 3 of them they came from India, but the ingredient came from China, and it had rocket fuel compounds in it. He said, if I'm getting it, then our
disturbing.
active do. And so the same company that sold that to the United States of America knowingly sent that product. Meanwhile, they're opening up a plant here in the
U.S. Do you
U.S.
think they're purposely doing it, though?
Or
do you think it's just a lack of regulations, oversight, and inspection?
This was it was done for economic reasons. They wanted to get global market share, this Chinese company, and so they made it the cheapest possible way.
Right.
And they don't care.
They just don't
It's clear.
care.
They don't care.
Because there's no oversight. There's no liabilities involved.
And I also have to ask the question, in this country, who's buying from these substandard suppliers, manufacturers, and selling them here? Who's buying them? We have to look there too. Because you have a seller, but who's buying this stuff? There's one of the hopeful things I see, Mark, there's a new startup company in Connecticut on the Yale Science campus, and they are testing, they're an online pharmacy, they test everything.
Right.
More than 10% of what they test, and they test every batch,
Right.
doesn't meet standard. So because China has lowered the bar in terms of price, how can anybody here compete with that? And it's also true that Chinese companies are being subsidized by their government.
Well, they're not Chinese companies. They're government
They're
companies.
government companies. Right.
Yeah,
It's state capitalism.
See, we look at it as a normal company as in America. You know, we're a capitalist country.
Absolutely, very different.
They're not. All the money they
ex-
make is for the government. So the government is going to do what's in the best interest of the Chinese government.
It's an extension of the Chinese government,
Right.
these companies. So that's what happened with our blood pressure medicine.
Well, I think it's happening with everything that's coming out of China, from blood pressure to building products to food.
And we tolerate it. That's what's so extraordinary.
Well, we tolerate it because we're looking for the best possible price, which gets into a whole nother economic, conversation
Sure.
in America. And we priced ourselves right out of it. But it's no longer looking at quality, it's looking at price. And
Right.
we need to go back to looking at quality. Now,
Because the assumption is that, one generic or another generic, that they're supposed to be the same.
right?
But we're finding out that's not true.
It's not true, exactly. Your book lays it out quite well. If anybody hasn't read China RX, you need to pick up a copy of this book. It's unbelievable. I don't read books, straight through like this one. It took me 2 days, but I read it straight through, and my brain hurt at the end because there was so much information involved in it. And
Thank you, Mark. And there's an appendix for readers to find out
How to
some
look up your
information on where it comes from.
Now, could the FDA actually start testing have specific ports for all pharmaceutical medications come in, have it a testing facility that they go through in order for that batch to make it through into American consumers?
I'd rather see a private sector do that at the point of sale to the U.S.
Right.
consumer, because it's so hard to test everything at a port.
Well, it would go.
Yeah.
It would go into that port, but then it would go to a facility and be tested before it left the facility.
A challenge the FDA has is they probably would not want to release the information about the name of the manufacturer and who's buying it. Whereas a private company, I would like to see that happen, because the FDA has to walk a very thin line between protecting consumers and not going so far out on a limb and the industry gets upset.
Well, I think that they look at it as they want to avoid creating a panic across the United States, because if everybody started to look at it and say, okay, do I trust my medication I'm getting from my pharmacist? Do I trust it? Because right now we go to the doctor, they give us a prescription, we go to the pharmacy, we fill it, we pop the pill in our mouth, and we don't think twice about it. We just trust it completely. But we're not the only ones. The doctors do it too. The doctors are trusting the medications.
Absolutely.
In the hospitals, when they're going through surgeries, they trust everything that the hospital has bought and given them to utilize.
Right.
So I'm going to ask a couple other.
But then I had the privilege of visiting a very prominent hospital and a very wonderful physician who's been doing his work for 40 years. And he said something: I've noticed patients not doing well on certain medicines.
Is that because the active ingredients may not be as much as it's supposed to be?
And this particular hospital is exploring testing. Think of this, having to test the medicines that they get. We're talking mostly about generics. And this physician, wonderful physician, he said, I think we're becoming like a developing country with our medicine.
Oh, I think we're becoming like a developing country in multiple areas.
But including our medicine, talk about trust.
Right, medicines is a key. Medicine and food, everybody wants to trust.
It's the bellwether, right.
Yes. And I asked this question earlier of you today, and that is that I've done a lot of research in the autism, and a lot of people are scared of vaccinations. And the World Health Organization was in control of vaccinations and its productions up to about 15 years ago, when it started allowing other countries to join into the market. And autism rates in the late 80s was about 1 out of every 2,500 people. And by the time the 90s came around, it was 1 in 1,000 people. By 2010, it went to 1 in 88. In 2017, it's 1 in 68 now of individuals. Those stats are the same in China as well, and they have a different bar of diagnosis of people with autism. If you have a slight autism, slight speech impediment, which is an autistic signal, they don't include it. So their numbers are probably quite higher. Do you think that there might be a link, and we should investigate that further about the active ingredients and what's happening? Or do you think it's a massive danger to national security of the health of America?
Well, vaccines I didn't take a close look at in China RX. I looked at more the pills, the tablets, because that's where China has been dominant for a number of years in this country, and where it's, antibiotics. We can't make antibiotics, generic antibiotics anymore. And there could be a lot of reasons for autism. There's so many things in our food and our water that we didn't have before. But I think the public has a right to know where anything they put in their body comes from. And there are people beginning to look at this.
I would say that we need to really look into it, because from about the end of the 80s, most of the medications were produced here in America.
It's what I call the industrial equivalent of home cooking.
Yes.
We used to make it here, but now we're doing, takeout from, so far away, and we have no idea who's making it.
When you bring up the concept of the cartels, I think about this is the methamphetamines and the other, chemical. I don't do drugs. I don't know all the names, right? But all the street drugs are cooked up in somebody's garage or in a wholesale warehouse in the desert area. And it's kind of almost equivalent to what's going on in China and some of the manufacturers there. It's it's literally a drug cartel. Well, they're selling prescription drugs.
One of the shocking things I came across while working on China RX is a memo from a very dedicated person in the FDA from a number of years ago saying we have no idea where these bulk drugs, the ingredients, are coming from,
Right.
and they could get to the president.
Yeah.
That was, way back when. We've made a lot of progress in tracking since then. But we were the Wild West,
Yeah.
importing from the Wild
Well,
East.
the Chinese government, I think, knew this. And in their 2025 plan of dominance of several areas of the economy, they knew exactly what to do, how to do it. And I think they've become well versed in the laws in America, including
absolutely.
the anti-franchise law. And they know what they're doing. There's a couple of questions in here. I pulled this from the internet. You were on a panel. And I think some of these questions are really great. And it says, how are the Chinese companies integrated into global pharmaceutical and medicine supply chains? And what are the implications for U.S. public health regulators and businesses? Short response to that. How integrated are they?
China is deeply embedded in our medicine supply.
What percentage of the active ingredients worldwide are produced by China?
I'm pegging it at 80 to 90%.
80 to 90%.
Of the ingredients, and that's the raw materials, chemicals. And to put it another way, if China shut the door tomorrow, the pharmacy shelves in this country would be empty within a couple of months.
And this goes right into chemotherapy, the blood thinners, any surgical
we couldn't do
procedures,
surgery. We
couldn't
couldn't treat ear infections. We couldn't treat pneumonia.
This is crazy.
We couldn't perform surgery. You can't treat cancer patients. You couldn't do dialysis. People on dialysis would have weeks to live.
I have a friend that's on dialysis, and he was on it. It was 4 years ago, and he said he had horrible reactions to it. And when reading the book, I think he needs to look into more of what the medications are in the dialysis that he's getting, because he called me up the other day. He sounded horrible, and I've known him for quite a while.
Oh my goodness!
And he's having the worst reactions to it. And he's saying, "Look, I'd rather not do this."
Oh my goodness!
And
It's
he said
dialysis
the normal
is very.
person. He goes, the normal person. He said would have died a long time ago.
Dialysis is very, very grueling in itself, and we have to be able to trust our medicines.
Without a doubt, it's a very dangerous. People take it for granted. I think most people take all medical procedures, for granted. And one more, a couple of other questions.
Sure.
What specific sourcing vulnerabilities exist for U.S. private public health and military medical facilities, patients and consumers vis-a-vis Chinese medical and biotech companies? And is the U.S. government adequately equipped to address these vulnerabilities?
Well, the U.S. government is not equipped to address our vulnerabilities. There's no one whose job it is in the federal government to know even who controls our drug supply and is accountable for assuring that we have an unfettered supply of quality medicines. It's no one's job. That's why we're in the situation that we're in. We would never do this for oil.
Of course.
We would never do this for food commodities like wheat. But we've allowed it to happen to our medicines.
Well, medicines have now become a commodity.
That's exactly right. But oil's a commodity, food's a commodity,
Right.
but we view them as a strategic asset. And one of the things I'd like to see from China RX is we begin to view our medicines as a strategic asset, not like buying T-shirts, buying it at the cheapest possible price. That's what's happened. And I say that not from the consumer point of view, but for those that buy from China. Who's buying this stuff from China and selling it to the American people in drugstores?
Well,
we have to begin to fix that.
On the conversation on the way here over the phone,
Yeah.
you said there is hope because you laid out 10 steps to correct this in
Yes.
your book. And you said step number 1 is the DOD, because of your book and your testimonies in Washington, that the DOD is now is researching and looking at and analyzing its vulnerabilities. Yes?
On a positive note, Mark, the first recommendation is in China RX is that we have to know where we're vulnerable.
Right.
And there needs to be a whole of government review about that vulnerability. And China RX came out in April 2018, and here we are just starting 2020, and that work is already underway.
That is fantastic.
And but then we need to find solutions so the DOD can actually procure differently. And wouldn't it be great if our taxpayer money spent for medicines for our military, for veterans, can be used to bring some of that manufacturing back home using the latest technology. We can actually make them cheaper. We can make them faster and higher quality, right in our own, communities across America.
Well, I think strategically, I think the federal government needs to really look at how do they strategically, not subsidize, but incentivize American companies to bring back the manufacturing of our medicine here in the United States.
Absolutely right.
And create the world dominancy of how would you say, quality, top quality medications here.
Absolutely, because the industrial base has been decimated for so many different industries, including our medicines. So there's going to be money needed to refurbish those plants, the ones that still remain, that have been lying empty and just non-use for so many years. And imagine what this would do to our communities and their economies.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. Well, something I've sat there. We're both in the political arena in different ways.
Sure.
And we always have to watch things that we do and we say, right? And in reading your book, I can't help but look at date stamps. A lot of this stuff, it started in Clinton to Bush, and then Barack Obama's administration. China really advanced heavily in the pharmaceutical industry under his watch. And I can't help to think in my own head, since Joe Biden was the one that was in control of relations and trade and everything else with China, that a lot of this stuff was unwittingly known and perpetrated by flat greed. And again, I mentioned it before, the greed and ignorance coming together
Absolutely.
of our elected officials not really knowing what is truly going on and what they're doing and the implications and ripple effects of what they decide to do.
One of the good people that read China RX said to me, so why did it take someone like you, a private citizen? No one paid me to do this book. I did it because how do you unsee this once you see it?
Right.
Why did it take someone like you to do this and no one else? How come our government didn't know this? We have this whole biodefense apparatus that's supposed to protect us from infectious disease. And yet we gave away our antibiotic manufacturing capability.
Do you think it's just because they're too close to the bubble? This is why our fourth estate, our media, is so important to America and America's freedom. But yet our media has been bought out by foreign countries even.
That's right. Think about getting a book like this published.
It probably gets stepped on more than it's ushered in.
But it did get published, and that gives me hope. And I'm heartened by the response of people, and it's really across the board politically. And I'm happy to say members of Congress on both sides are reading it. Members in the executive branch of government are reading it. Members of the public, or even people in industry. Because, they have to look at their future. What does their future look like?
Well, absolutely. Well, this is a non-tribal or non-partisan issue. Our medications and the security and quality of our medications goes across the board, because a pill that's prescribed to somebody doesn't ask, well, you're Democrat or you're Republican first.
Right. And I said,
here, take it.
And during the testimony, I started out by saying these are not the illegal drugs we're talking about here. These are the medicines taken by members of Congress.
Yes.
By people in the White House and the executive branches at very high levels, people in the Supreme Court.
What does it say?
This is us.
By the time I think you're 60 years old, you're taking 5 to 6 prescriptions. The average person in America.
I try to avoid that if I can.
I don't take any.
Yeah, neither do I. Yeah,
But I take vitamins.
We're good to go.
Your book scared me on vitamins.
We can't make vitamin C and the other vitamins. Yeah. And this is global. The other thing I want to say, people say, well, what about India? India is big. They produce like 25% of generic drugs in the U.S., but guess what? They're dependent on China.
They're dependent on China to get the active ingredients for the generic drugs.
And I think China's going to overtake India.
Well, that's their directive. That's the way they want to go.
Yeah.
So what factors have contributed to China's emergence as a global hub of counterfeit medicines and pharmaceuticals? That's huge, isn't it? The counterfeit?
The counterfeits.
Just the straight counterfeit.
The counterfeits are devastating for countries that don't have any system in place or rudimentary systems in place to protect their people. So you've got malaria drugs in going to countries like Africa that don't work. You have antibiotics in countries that don't work, and that contributes to antimicrobial resistance. It's just how to deceive vulnerable people who are sick and sending them counterfeit drugs.
One of the segments in the book here is you brought in the example of the chicken being produced. Now, and one of the things that was alarming to me is one of the provinces in China, they tested the chicken, and 87% of the chicken had a bacteria in it that was resistant to all, even the last resort antibiotic.
And the only good news about that is that's what kept the United States from importing chicken from China, is disease in Chinese chickens. Otherwise, it'd be coming here. So thank goodness we have.
But they strong-armed us as well, because they refused to bring in the beef, right? And so they got the cattlemen, associations to start lobbying for the chicken to come into the U.S. So there is a certain amount coming in now, though, isn't there?
Not for the chicken.
Not for the chicken.
For those that watch this, they really held up
the chicken.
But they really haven't wanted to do that because it's too much trouble. They really wanted to export chicken. And frankly, it was some U.S.-based companies that built giant processing facilities in China for chicken. And it was cheaper there because their regulations were they could do like twice as many chickens, process them per minute than here.
Yeah, you wrote that in the book. It's 140 chickens per minute here in the U.S. They do 250 over there.
And USDA inspectors would not be in any of those plants in China. The U.S. consumer would be relying on Chinese government inspectors to inspect chicken coming from that country.
That's insane.
So at least we've held off on that. But I think where we're heading with our medicines, if we don't act quickly in the next 5 years, FDA is losing leverage. As a country, we're losing leverage with China.
Well, political and economic leverage.
And they'll say, well, if we're producing 50% of your generics, U.S., we're now at 9%, they'll say, well, we don't need your FDA. Just designate us and we'll do our own inspections. That's coming.
That's insane.
I really believe that's going to come.
I was amused that the Chinese wanted to develop a chicken because the chicken feet are delicacies over there, and chicken wings. They were trying to develop a chicken with 6 feet and 6 wings.
Oh, that was, they just put so much growth hormone in there and additives. Can you imagine that?
It probably glowed at nighttime, too.
Yeah, you need reverence for life, You have to have reverence for life. Look, you talk about vaccines. What happened to that vaccine scandal over there? But at least China, they arrested like 30, 40 people. Those were vaccines that stayed in China. They didn't come here. But there's never any accountability when Americans die from Chinese-made medicines.
Well, I think one of their inspectors was taking bribes, and he was executed for it.
The head of the FDA counterpart in China, he was executed for taking bribes.
Now, do you think that was because he was taking bribes, or because he got caught?
Because he got caught, and because
I'm sure they take bribes all the time.
Because China knows that it has to, if it's going to have a growing economy, people are going to be demanding medicines, and they don't want to buy them from the U.S. They want to make them themselves. And to do that, so then they had to, and they really have made a lot of progress in stepping up their game.
Well, you look at China and you say, okay, China's 1.5 billion people. They have I can't blame the Chinese government for wanting to do what they want to do.
They've actually done a good job to lift people out of poverty. There's pollution, all that, but we complain about nationalism here in the U.S. China is very nationalistic, and they're serving the needs and interests of their people.
President Trump has come out and said, look, I'm not the president of the world. I'm the president of the United States of America, and I have an obligation to look after Americans' interests first. And so does every other leader of every other
And that's
country.
what China is doing.
So I don't blame China. I think they're the best negotiators I've come up against is Chinese negotiators.
Well,
they're brutal.
They've had a very smart policy, and they're executing it. And we don't have a policy.
No.
We don't even have a response.
See, now what risk, if any, does greater U.S.-China health cooperation pose for U.S. economic and national security interest?
Well,
put it in a nutshell. Everything.
Well, in World War I, the British had a food blockade of Germany, and 700,000 Germans died of starvation.
Right.
And then in World War II, Germany did that to England to try to demoralize the population. If you want to destabilize a country and demoralize a population really quickly, just withhold their antibiotics.
So the greatest strategic move that China has been making over the last couple of decades is taking over medicine and food.
Absolutely. Certainly medicine.
and which gives them right now, a tremendous bargaining chip in all negotiations, political and economic.
It gives them enormous leverage, and we've let them take it.
And the Pentagon has come out very strategically and honestly and said, look, there isn't a military threat in the world that can challenge America. And they're right. But it's an economic threat. And China is posing itself right now to be the biggest economic threat to America, and we keep allowing it.
And the Defense Department acknowledged, to their credit, that the service members are dependent on China for some of the medicines for chemical, nuclear, and biological warfare.
That's insane. The commission, okay, what are the recommendations for congressional action related to the topic of your testimony that you gave in front of Congress?
A common theme, Mark, has
Yes.
been we need to bring manufacturing back home. And
Straightforward.
there are ways to do that using
Tell us a couple.
Well, there's advanced manufacturing technology that if we can bring that back home, was created in this country.
Mm-hmm.
They're making now in a box in a lab 1,000 tablets of a really important antibiotic that's an antidote for anthrax.
Right.
How can we take that technology to commercial scale production? Generic companies are not going to invest in it because Western companies are going out of business. So let's start with the federal government to make it for the military, for the VA, invest in the plant and equipment, and once we do that, it costs 40% less per pill, roughly.
Right.
So, and then we have to have long-term contracts to protect those companies that will be making it or could be making it for the DoD and VA. We just can't leave it to the open market. The notion of generic competition on the basis of price, all that's done is pushed manufacturing to China and all our money to China for our medicine.
Is there real hope that China will straighten out? Because I know with their involvement in the World Trade Organization, thinking that they were going to advance into the free marketplace and capitalism, it really hasn't worked out because they're using the old strong-arm tactics of communism and socialism to dominate the markets. But in this field, we really shouldn't trust that direction.
Well, they
strategically.
use this field, a medicinal product like vitamin C, prevent scurvy.
Right.
They use this field, these products, as a means to undermine the free market economic system in the United States using our court system.
Well, I just, myself personally, I can't imagine the actual panic and fear that China could impose on the population of America if it just targeted, let's say, 20 different medications and poisoned them.
That's right.
On purpose.
That's right.
The actual fear and distrust that America would have, both in the medical industry as well as the general population, would be enormous.
And the amount of energy, using that quote, that would be people's energy would be so devoted to figuring out what happened rather than building up our own domestic self-sufficiency to protect our health and our national security.
How dangerous is it at this point? You can touch on it for a moment. They produce a tremendous amount of medical devices as well.
Hip and knee implants, defibrillators.
Yes.
Who's checking that?
That's,
Nobody's checking that.
That's the scary thing, right?
Nobody's checking that. CT scanners will be coming in if they're not here already.
Yep.
We are losing our industrial base to operate our healthcare system.
Do you think that that is a strategic drive of China as well?
Absolutely.
Is the cost. I mean, when the ACA came out, the ACA was Affordable Care Act. Affordable Care Act. What you're divulging in your book, China RX, is a great example of how they are price fixing everything in the world that pertains to healthcare.
When you lose control over the supply, if you're not making things anymore and somebody else is, you lose control over the quality. You lose control over how much you're going to pay for it. They're going to be the price setter, and we're just going to be the price takers. They're going to sell us whatever they have and take it or leave it, America,
Right.
because you have no other option.
That is a scary thought, Rosemary. It really is.
It really is that, and I don't want to, but we have to wake ourselves up to what's happened.
I don't think strategically right now we're in extremely dangerous. I think that your book has come out in a moment of time perfect moment of time
It really
to make
is,
the
yes.
government and the general population, because I've talked about it at different speaking engagements I've had, and about our vulnerability. And there's a lot of people that are actually aware of it, and they don't like it. In fact, a friend of mine that works at the VA said that. He wanted to know because his medication, his high blood pressure medication, he wanted to know the lot number. They wouldn't tell him the lot number.
Exactly right.
And it was a recall on it, and they still wouldn't tell him. They said, don't worry about it, yours isn't involved in it. And he said, but I want to know. And so the secrecy, that the FDA and our pharmaceutical companies are operating behind is actually scarier than most people think. But it's done that way strategically to keep the panic from happening.
Right.
But I think that people have to be concerned at this point.
Right.
I think our regulators and our congressmen have to be concerned about it.
And also industry. One of the nicest and most heartening things that I heard from someone in industry was a gentleman at a senior level in a company based in the U.S. And he said, I want to tell you, I read China RX. I gave it to my other C-suite colleagues.
Right.
And the CEO said, I want you to present this to our board, which he did.
Right.
And the good news is, Mark, that company made a different decision to change their operations over the course of time for business continuity and risk management. That's how I want this book to be used by business, government, and individuals.
It should be. Now, I wanted to read one of them. One of the, how would you say, comments that are made right off the bat. This is by Edwin Meese III. 75, the 75th U.S. Attorney General. It says, China RX describes a major threat to the strategic position of the United States in the world, a matter affecting this country's health and its economic and social well-being. This book reveals how the loss of the manufacturing capability and control of the supply of critical medicines and their component ingredients endangers the medical future of America's public, while also posing a serious threat to our economy as well. The author prescribed what must be done to remedy this major deficiency in our nation's public health infrastructure. Again, for everybody watching, you need to pick up a copy of this book and read it. You will be armed with all the knowledge you need to talk to people within your community, talk to even your own healthcare providers, and educate them of how dangerous, both in our health, both in our economy, and military strategies as well, that this is exposing. Rosemary, I want to really thank you for taking the time to sit with me and have this conversation. I know that we can probably do 25 episodes on this.
Let's do a call-in. People have lots of great questions. This is important to all of us, no matter who we are.
It is. It is. On the macro level, it is so mind-boggling. On the macro. Yeah, I can get into the weeds of the micro levels, but the macro level...
That we let this leave our country.
It's actually easy to fix on the macro level. If you look at it and say, if the federal government really put their mind to it and said, you know what, if the DOD comes back with the risk assessment and says, we need to address this, we have the manufacturing might to bring it back. We have the ability within Congress to be able to incentivize the return in manufacturing to America. And my suggestion is that everybody looks at their congressman and comes to them with that question. What are you going to do about our medicine? What are you going to do about our health security in America?
Right.
Because my vote counts on it.
It does count. On this one, it'll count.
It will count.
And your member of Congress will pay attention to this.
Well, hopefully I'm the next congressman in my district as well.
There you go.
There we go. Thank you
Thank you,
again,
Mark.
Rosemary. Back live in studio, and I want to read a couple of last things. I started off by railing on our media and our news agencies. The owners of the 3 major television networks in the United States have financial interest in China. The Walt Disney Company, which built the Shanghai theme park, owns the ABC television network. The CBS television network is part of CBS Corporation, which has an international division, CBS Interactive. It provides online entertainment and information content in China and other countries. And NBC is owned by the NBC Universal, which is building a theme park in China scheduled to open in 2020. In a compelling article about Chinese government censorship about China, The Economist wrote, "Watch what you say, even at home. If opined today, the communist country wields its now formidable leverage in all manners of ways, successfully muting and softening criticism from CEOs and world leaders. American medicine making is a vital part of the country's health, security, economic prosperity, and national security. As manufacturing goes, so goes the workforce and the skills to innovate, build, and operate manufacturing plants. Reshoring can bolster employment and maintain a workforce with the skills necessary for a rapid buildup in production and anticipation of a public health emergency and national security event. A longtime industry leader in pharmaceutical manufacturing who has witnessed the closure of many manufacturing plants asks, "Who's going to do this after my generation retires?" We have to turn it around. He is right, and we have to have the last word. We have to get back to making things here in the United States. Thank you once again for joining us this evening about the China RX. Please tune in next Thursday and watch a fascinating show again. Ted, take it home.
And as I close out every show each week, remember, ignorance prevails when rational minds sit back and do nothing. Be sure to tune in next week.
You're listening to The Voice of Reason with Mark Reed and Ted Durden, only on LA Talk Radio.